The sun blazed mercilessly over the Arizona territory as dust devils danced across the barren landscape near Tombstone. Jack Morrison had been waiting 3 days for his partner's arrival at their hidden camp in Devil's Canyon, a place where decent folks feared to tread and lawmen rarely ventured. The notorious outlaw adjusted his weathered hat and checked his pocket watch for the 100th time that morning. Santiago should have been here by now with the money from their latest job. Instead of Santiago's familiar silhouette appearing on the horizon, a lone figure approached on horseback. Jack squinted through the heat haze, his hand instinctively moving to his Colt revolver. As the rider drew closer, his jaw nearly hit the desert floor. It wasn't Santiago at all, but a young Mexican woman with long black hair flowing behind her like a banner in the wind. She wore a simple white dress that somehow remained pristine despite the dusty journey, and her dark eyes held a determination that made seasoned gunfighters step back. The woman dismounted her horse with practiced ease and walked directly toward Jack's camp as if she owned the place. Her boots clicked against the rocky ground with purpose, each step echoing off the canyon walls. When she was close enough that Jack could see the gold cross hanging around her neck, she stopped and placed her hands on her hips with the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything in her life. "You must be Jack Morrison," she said in accented English, her voice carrying a musical quality that seemed out of place in this godforsaken corner of the territory. "I am Esperanza Valdez. You marry me?" Jack's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. In all his years of robbing trains and dodging bounty hunters, nothing had prepared him for this moment. He had faced down entire posses of lawmen without blinking, but this small woman with her direct question had rendered him completely speechless. The other members of his gang, Billy Thompson from Kansas and Red Murphy from Texas, emerged from their hiding spots among the rocks, drawn by the commotion. "Ma'am, I think you might have the wrong camp," Jack finally managed to say, removing his hat out of ingrained politeness despite his confusion. "We're not exactly the marrying type around here. We're wanted men with prices on our heads." Esperanza's laugh tinkled like silver bells in the desert air. "Oh, but you are exactly the right man, Jack Morrison. My father, Don Carlos Valdez, has arranged everything. You steal from his rival, Eduardo Morales, and in return you receive my hand in marriage along with a substantial dowry. Did Santiago not explain this to you?" The mention of Santiago's name sent a chill down Jack's spine despite the oppressive heat. His partner had been acting strange lately, taking longer trips to town and being secretive about his activities. Jack had assumed Santiago was scouting their next job or maybe visiting one of the saloon girls in Tucson, but this revelation painted an entirely different picture. "Santiago never mentioned any arrangement," Jack said slowly, his mind racing through recent conversations with his partner. "What exactly did he tell your father?" Before Esperanza could answer, the distinctive sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. Jack and his men immediately took defensive positions behind the large boulders that had served as their camp's natural fortification. Esperanza, however, remained standing in the open, seemingly unconcerned about the potential danger. A group of 5 riders appeared at the canyon's entrance, their faces obscured by bandanas and their weapons drawn. The leader, a tall man with silver spurs that caught the sunlight, called out in a voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Jack Morrison, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up, and we might let you live long enough to stand trial." Jack recognized the voice immediately. Marshal Tom Bradley from Phoenix had been hunting him for over 2 years, ever since the Gila River train robbery that had netted Jack's gang nearly $50,000 in gold. Bradley was known throughout the territory as a man who never gave up once he had a scent, and his reputation for bringing in his quarries dead or alive was legendary. "What do you want, Bradley?" Jack shouted from behind his rocky cover. "Last I checked, this canyon wasn't in your jurisdiction. Jurisdiction follows me wherever I go when it comes to you, Morrison. But I'm not here about your past crimes. I'm here about Santiago Reyes. He's been working with us for the past 6 months, feeding us information about your gang's activities." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. Santiago, his partner for over 5 years, the man who had saved his life more times than he could count, had been betraying them to the law. Jack's world tilted on its axis as he tried to process this revelation. Everything made sense now, the near misses with law enforcement, the jobs that had gone wrong at the last minute, the feeling that someone was always one step ahead of them. Esperanza's voice cut through Jack's shock like a knife through silk. Marshal Bradley speaks the truth. Santiago came to my father 3 weeks ago with a proposition. He would deliver you to Don Carlos in exchange for my hand in marriage and a substantial reward. My father, being a practical man, saw an opportunity to rid himself of both a troublesome daughter and a business rival. Jack's head spun with the implications. Not only had his partner betrayed him to the law, but he had also been negotiating Jack's future without his knowledge or consent. The audacity of it was staggering even by outlaw standards. But there is more to this story than any of you know, Esperanza continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. Santiago made a critical error in his planning. He assumed that Don Carlos Valdez was merely a wealthy rancher looking to arrange his daughter's marriage. What Santiago did not know is that my father is also the head of a smuggling operation that moves silver from Mexico through Arizona territory. Marshal Bradley's voice carried a note of surprise when he responded. Ma'am, if what you're saying is true, then we have a much bigger problem on our hands than one gang of train robbers. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture that none of them had anticipated. Jack realized that he and his gang had unwittingly become pawns in a much larger game involving international smuggling, family politics, and law enforcement corruption that reached higher than he had ever imagined. 3 months ago, Esperanza continued, seemingly unaffected by the guns pointed in various directions around the canyon, Eduardo Morales discovered my father's smuggling routes and began demanding a percentage of the profits. When my father refused, Morales threatened to expose the operation to American authorities. That is when Santiago appeared with his proposal. The sun had moved significantly across the sky during this revelation, casting longer shadows among the rocks and creating an almost theatrical atmosphere for the unfolding drama. Jack found himself caught between admiration for Esperanza's composure and growing concern about how deep this conspiracy ran. So Santiago's plan was to eliminate Morales by having us rob him, marry you to legitimize his position with your father, and presumably take over the smuggling operation? Jack asked, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Precisely, Esperanza confirmed. But Santiago underestimated both my intelligence and my determination to control my own destiny. While he was making plans with my father, I was making my own arrangements. Billy Thompson, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke up. Jack, we need to get out of here. This whole situation smells like a trap, and I don't like our odds with the marshal and his men blocking the only way out. Red Murphy nodded in agreement, his weathered face creased with worry. The kid's right, Jack. Whatever game is being played here, we're outnumbered and outgunned. But Jack found himself strangely fascinated by Esperanza and the complex web of deception that had brought them all to this moment. In his years as an outlaw, he had encountered many dangerous situations, but none quite like this where the stakes seemed to shift with every revelation. What arrangements did you make, Miss Valdez? Jack asked, ignoring his men's concerns for the moment. Esperanza's smile was both beautiful and terrifying. I sent word to Eduardo Morales about this meeting. He should be arriving shortly with his own men. I also contacted a certain Captain Rodriguez of the Mexican Army, who has been tracking my father's activities for the past year. The sound of more approaching horses confirmed her words, and Jack realized that their small canyon was about to become very crowded indeed. The situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control, with multiple factions converging on their position for different reasons. Furthermore, Esperanza continued, I have in my possession detailed records of every transaction, every route, and every official who has been paid to look the other way in my father's smuggling operation. These documents are currently in a safe location, but they could easily find their way to the territorial governor or even Washington if something were to happen to me. Marshal Bradley's voice carried a new note of respect when he responded. Ma'am, it sounds like you've thought of everything. But what exactly do you want from all of this? What I want, Marshal Bradley, is very simple. I want my freedom. I want to choose my own husband if I choose to marry at all. I want control of my inheritance, which is considerable. And I want all of these men to stop treating me like a prize to be won or traded. Jack found himself genuinely impressed by Esperanza's planning and determination. In a world where women, particularly Mexican women in the American territories, had limited options and even fewer rights, she had managed to orchestrate a situation where she held all the cards. The arrival of Eduardo Morales and his men added another layer of tension to the already volatile situation. Morales, a heavy-set man with an elaborate mustache and expensive clothes that seemed inappropriate for the desert setting, rode into the canyon with the confidence of someone who believed he was in complete control. "Ah, Señorita Valdez," Morales called out in heavily accented English. "How thoughtful of you to arrange this meeting. I trust you have reconsidered your father's stubborn refusal to negotiate with me." "I have reconsidered many things, Señor Morales," Esperanza replied coolly, "including whether any of you deserve to leave this canyon alive." The ominous tone in her voice made everyone present reassess their understanding of the situation. Jack began to suspect that Esperanza Valdez was far more dangerous than any of them had realized. Captain Rodriguez and his soldiers appeared at the canyon's rim, their rifles trained on everyone below. The Mexican officer called down in clear, precise English, "By the authority of the Mexican government, I order all parties to lay down their weapons. This woman is wanted for questioning regarding crimes against the state." Esperanza's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Oh, Captain Rodriguez, you are even more foolish than the rest of them. Did you really think I would arrange this gathering without ensuring my own safety?" She reached into her dress and produced a small mirror, which she used to reflect sunlight toward a specific point on the canyon wall. Within moments, the crack of rifle fire echoed from multiple positions around the canyon's rim. Several of Rodriguez's soldiers fell, and the rest scrambled for cover. "I have been planning this day for 2 years," Esperanza announced to the increasingly chaotic scene below. "Every one of you has underestimated me, and now you will all pay the price for your arrogance." Jack realized that they were all trapped in an elaborate revenge plot orchestrated by a woman who had been planning every detail while everyone else was making assumptions about her role as a passive victim. The true scope of her intelligence network and planning was becoming terrifyingly clear. The gunfight that erupted was unlike anything Jack had experienced in his outlaw career. Instead of the usual straightforward confrontation between lawmen and criminals, this battle involved multiple factions with conflicting objectives, all manipulated by Esperanza's careful orchestration. Marshal Bradley's men found themselves caught between the smugglers they had come to arrest and the Mexican soldiers who saw them as foreign invaders. Morales's gang was fighting both the law and the military while trying to capture Esperanza. Rodriguez's remaining soldiers were attempting to maintain order while under fire from unknown snipers positioned around the canyon. Through it all, Esperanza stood calmly in the center of the chaos, seemingly protected by some invisible shield. Jack began to understand that her hired guns were positioned with precise instructions about who to shoot and who to protect. As the battle raged around them, Jack made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Instead of trying to escape or join the fight, he approached Esperanza with his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Miss Valdez," he said loudly enough to be heard over the gunfire, "I believe you asked me a question when you arrived. My answer is yes, but only if you're asking Jack Morrison the man, not Jack Morrison the outlaw." Esperanza's eyes widened slightly, the first sign of genuine surprise she had shown since her arrival. "You would give up your life of crime for someone you met an hour ago?" "I would give up my life of crime for someone intelligent enough to orchestrate all of this, brave enough to face down armed men, and honest enough to tell me exactly what she wants. That's not someone I meet every day." The gunfight was beginning to wind down, with casualties on all sides and ammunition running low. Marshal Bradley called for a ceasefire, recognizing that the situation had evolved beyond anyone's ability to control through violence alone. "It seems to me," Bradley announced, "that Miss Valdez holds the strongest position here. Perhaps we should hear what she proposes as a resolution to this standoff." Esperanza nodded gracefully, as if she had been waiting for this invitation all along. "My proposal is simple. Santiago Reyes, who betrayed everyone here in different ways, will face justice for his crimes. My father will retire from his smuggling activities and transfer his legitimate business interests to me. Eduardo Morales will cease his interference in my family's affairs. Captain Rodriguez will report to his superiors that the smuggling operation has been voluntarily dissolved. And Marshal Bradley will consider the debt that Jack Morrison owes to society to be paid in full. The audacity of her proposal was matched only by the fact that she was in a position to enforce it. The documents she possessed, combined with the strategic advantage her hidden marksman provided, gave her negotiating power that none of the men present could match. "And what do you get out of this arrangement, Miss Valdez?" Jack asked, genuinely curious about her motivations. "I get my freedom, Mr. Morrison. I get to choose my own path in life, whether that includes marriage or not. I get control of enough resources to ensure that no one can ever try to trade me like livestock again. And perhaps most importantly, I get the satisfaction of proving that a Mexican woman can outthink, outplan, and outmaneuver all of you." The sun was beginning to set over the Arizona territory, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold that seemed appropriate for the dramatic conclusion of this extraordinary day. One by one, the various parties began to agree to Esperanza's terms, recognizing that she had left them little choice in the matter. Santiago never did arrive at the camp. Later investigations would reveal that he had been killed 3 days earlier while trying to escape from Tucson with money stolen from both Don Carlos and Eduardo Morales, his betrayals having finally caught up with him. Jack Morrison did indeed give up his life of crime, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of disappearing into anonymity, he became a legitimate businessman, using his knowledge of the territory's hidden places and forgotten routes to establish a successful freight company. Whether he ever married Esperanza Valdez remains a subject of speculation among historians, as both of them seem to value their privacy above all else. Marshal Bradley returned to Phoenix with a report that satisfied his superiors while omitting certain details that might have complicated relations between the United States and Mexico. Eduardo Morales disappeared entirely, some say to South America, others claim he joined a monastery. Captain Rodriguez received a promotion for successfully concluding a difficult international incident, though he never spoke publicly about the events in Devil's Canyon. Don Carlos Valdez did indeed retire from smuggling and lived quietly on his ranch until his death 10 years later. The canyon itself returned to its former emptiness, visited only by the occasional prospector or cattle rustler who had no idea of the extraordinary drama that had played out among its rocks. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right through Devil's Canyon, old-timers swear they can still hear the echo of a woman's laughter, confident and free, carried on the desert air like a promise that intelligence and determination will always triumph over brute force and arrogance. Years later, when Jack would tell this story to trusted friends, he would always end it the same way. Never underestimate a woman who knows what she wants, especially if she's smart enough to get it. And those who knew him well could see in his eyes the respect and admiration that had never faded, whether for a wife, a partner, or simply the most remarkable person he had ever encountered in a life full of extraordinary events. The dust had settled in Devil's Canyon, but the echoes of gunfire still rang in everyone's ears. Bodies lay scattered across the rocky ground, testament to the deadly game that Esperanza Valdez had orchestrated with surgical precision. Marshal Bradley counted his losses, 3 good men who would never return to their families in Phoenix. Captain Rodriguez had fared worse, with half his unit either dead or wounded, their blood staining the Arizona soil a deep crimson. Eduardo Morales sat propped against a boulder, clutching his wounded shoulder while his surviving men tended to their own injuries. The expensive clothes he had worn so proudly were now torn and dirty, his elaborate mustache drooping with sweat and defeat. He stared at Esperanza with a mixture of fear and grudging respect, finally understanding that he had been outmatched from the very beginning. Jack Morrison stood beside Esperanza, his own smoking revolver still in his hand, though he had fired only in self-defense during the chaotic battle. Billy Thompson and Red Murphy emerged from their cover, both wounded but alive, their faces reflecting the same bewilderment that Jack felt. In all their years of criminal activity, they had never witnessed anything quite like what had just transpired. The hidden marksmen that Esperanza had positioned around the canyon began to reveal themselves, descending from their rocky perches with the practiced efficiency of professional soldiers. Jack counted at least 12 men, all well-armed and clearly experienced in warfare. These were not common hired guns, but veterans who moved with the discipline of former military personnel. "Who are these men?" Marshal Bradley asked, his voice hoarse from shouting orders during the firefight. His remaining deputies kept their weapons ready but made no aggressive moves, recognizing that they were still outnumbered despite the casualties on all sides. Esperanza smiled, that same enigmatic expression that had captivated and terrified everyone since her arrival. "They are men who served under my late husband, Colonel Miguel Herrera, during the French intervention in Mexico. When he died defending Puebla, they swore an oath to protect me and follow my commands. They have been waiting 2 years for the opportunity to honor that oath." The revelation added another layer to the complex web of Esperanza's identity. She was not merely the daughter of a wealthy rancher and smuggler, but the widow of a war hero, a woman who commanded the loyalty of battle-hardened veterans who had fought against European invaders on Mexican soil. Captain Rodriguez, despite his wounded pride and decimated unit, managed to maintain his military bearing as he addressed her. "Señora Herrera, if that is indeed your true name, your husband was known throughout Mexico as a man of honor. It pains me to see his widow involved in such criminal activities." "Criminal activities, Captain?" Esperanza's voice carried a sharp edge. "Was it criminal when my husband died fighting to preserve Mexican sovereignty? Was it criminal when these men were left without pay or pensions by a government more concerned with politics than the welfare of its soldiers? Was it criminal when my father turned to smuggling because the American authorities made legitimate trade impossible with their excessive tariffs and discriminatory practices?" Her words hung in the desert air like an indictment, forcing everyone present to confront uncomfortable truths about the complex relationships between nations, laws, and survival in the harsh borderlands of the American Southwest. Jack found himself drawn deeper into admiration for this remarkable woman, who seemed to have an answer for every challenge and a justification for every action. But he also recognized the pain behind her fierce independence, the loss that had shaped her into someone who trusted no one completely and relied only on her own intelligence and planning. "The question now," Marshal Bradley said, holstering his weapon as a gesture of temporary truce, "is what happens next. We have dead American lawmen and Mexican soldiers, along with various criminals and smugglers. This incident will require explanation to authorities on both sides of the border." Esperanza nodded thoughtfully, as if she had anticipated this concern as well. "The explanation is quite simple, Marshal Bradley. A gang of American outlaws attacked a Mexican patrol, resulting in a firefight that left casualties on both sides. Captain Rodriguez and his surviving men will report that they successfully disrupted a smuggling operation, though at great cost. You will report that you tracked dangerous criminals to this location, where they were eliminated during the ensuing battle." "And what about the truth?" Captain Rodriguez asked, his military training demanding accuracy in all reports. "The truth, Captain, is that sometimes the official version of events serves justice better than the complete facts. My father's smuggling operation will cease immediately. Eduardo Morales will leave this territory and never return. The men responsible for betraying various parties are dead. The stolen money will be returned to its rightful owners. What more justice do you require?" Marshal Bradley considered her words carefully. He had spent his entire career upholding the letter of the law, but he had also learned that sometimes the spirit of justice required flexibility in its application. The woman before him had orchestrated the resolution of multiple criminal cases while eliminating several dangerous individuals who had long evaded capture. "There is still the matter of Jack Morrison and his gang," Bradley said. "They are wanted for numerous crimes across the territory." Jack stepped forward, understanding that this was the moment when his future would be determined. "Marshal, I won't insult your intelligence by claiming innocence of the crimes you've accused me of. But I will say that I'm ready to leave that life behind if given the opportunity. And what guarantee do I have that you won't return to your criminal ways the moment I ride out of this canyon?" Bradley asked. Before Jack could respond, Esperanza placed her hand on his arm. You have my guarantee, Marshal. Jack Morrison will establish a legitimate business using skills he acquired during his outlaw years. He will employ men like Billy Thompson and Red Murphy, giving them the chance to build honest lives. And he will have my resources and connections to ensure his success. The proposal was audacious in its scope, transforming criminals into businessmen through the sheer force of Esperanza's will and financial backing. But as Jack looked into her eyes, he saw not just determination but hope, the possibility of redemption that he had never dared to imagine. Billy Thompson spoke up, his young voice carrying newfound maturity. Jack, if you're serious about going straight, count me in. I'm tired of running and looking over my shoulder every day. Red Murphy nodded his agreement. These old bones weren't made for sleeping on hard ground and dodging bullets forever. If the lady is offering us a chance at legitimate work, I say we take it. The transformation from desperate outlaws to hopeful entrepreneurs seemed to occur in the space of a few heartbeats, facilitated by Esperanza's ability to see potential where others saw only problems. Captain Rodriguez, despite his losses and wounded pride, found himself impressed by the elegant solution being proposed. Senora Herrera, your proposal would resolve several outstanding issues for my government as well. But I must ask, what becomes of you in all these arrangements? Esperanza's smile was radiant as she gazed across the desert landscape that had witnessed so much violence and deception. I become what I have always wanted to be, Captain. I become free. Free to make my own choices, to control my own destiny, to build something meaningful with my life. She turned to Jack with an expression that combined affection with challenge. As for your question about marriage, Mr. Morrison, I believe we should get to know each other better before making such momentous decisions. But I am willing to explore the possibility, if you are prepared to accept a wife who will never be content to simply tend house and bear children. Jack's laughter echoed off the canyon walls, a sound of genuine joy that seemed to cleanse the air of its recent violence. Miss Valdez, or should I say Mrs. Herrera, I wouldn't want you any other way. A man would have to be a fool to try to cage a spirit like yours. As the sun completed its journey toward the western horizon, the various parties began to make preparations for their departure from Devil's Canyon. The dead would be buried with appropriate respect, the wounded would be cared for, and the living would begin the process of rebuilding their lives according to the new arrangements that had been forged in blood and negotiation. Eduardo Morales, his shoulder bound and his pride thoroughly humbled, approached Esperanza with a mixture of defeat and admiration. Senora, I have underestimated you completely. I concede that you have won this contest of wills, and I will honor my agreement to leave this territory. Senor Morales, Esperanza replied graciously, there were no winners or losers here today, only people learning to make better choices. I wish you well in whatever new life you choose to build. Marshal Bradley organized the burial details and supervised the collection of evidence that would support the official reports. Despite his initial skepticism, he found himself believing that this extraordinary woman might actually succeed in transforming criminals into productive citizens. Captain Rodriguez, supported by his surviving soldiers, prepared for the long journey back to Mexico. His report would praise the success of the mission while carefully omitting details that might complicate international relations. As darkness fell over Devil's Canyon, campfires began to dot the landscape where mortal enemies now shared food and medical supplies. The strange fellowship forged by shared danger and mutual respect would not last beyond this night, but it represented a moment of humanity that transcended the violence that had brought them together. Jack sat beside one of the fires, watching Esperanza as she moved among the wounded, offering comfort and assistance regardless of which side they had fought on. Her compassion was as remarkable as her intelligence, and he began to understand that her strength came not from hardness but from an unshakable core of integrity. Years later, when historians would study the transformation of the American West from a lawless frontier to organized territories and eventually states, they would note the gradual disappearance of certain notorious outlaw gangs and the mysterious emergence of successful freight and mining companies owned by men with suspiciously appropriate skills for such enterprises. The Morrison Freight Company, established in Tucson just 6 months after the events in Devil's Canyon, would become one of the most reliable transportation services in the territory. Its owner, a former outlaw named Jack Morrison, was known for his uncanny ability to navigate treacherous terrain and his absolute trustworthiness in delivering valuable cargo. The company's silent partner, a wealthy widow named Esperanza Herrera, was respected throughout the business community for her sharp mind and her charitable works supporting war veterans and their families. Rumors persisted that she and Morrison had married in a private ceremony, but neither ever confirmed or denied these stories. Billy Thompson and Red Murphy, along with several other former criminals, found honest work with the freight company and eventually established families and respectable positions in their communities. Their transformation from desperate outlaws to solid citizens became a source of hope for others seeking to escape lives of crime. Devil's Canyon returned to its former emptiness, visited only by the wind and the occasional traveler who had lost his way. But on clear desert nights, when the moon illuminated the rocky walls where so much drama had unfolded, some claimed to hear voices carried on the breeze, speaking of honor, redemption, and the possibility that even the most unlikely people could change their destiny through courage and determination. The legend of that extraordinary day would grow in the telling, as legends do, but the essential truth remained unchanged. In a time and place where might typically made right, intelligence and integrity had triumphed over brute force and corruption. And in the heart of one former outlaw, the memory of a remarkable woman's question would continue to echo, "You marry me?" Not as a demand or a plea, but as an invitation to join her in building something better than either of them could achieve alone.